Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories to go into. It seems Afghanistan, as we speak right now, is going through a stage similar to the fall of Saigon, the end of the Vietnam War, and some very familiar images of that, including, for example, people being evacuated from the U.S. Embassy, people trying to load onto helicopters as they take off, airplanes as they take off, and a lot of people very scared about what's going to happen, and especially what the future of Afghanistan is going to be. Now, one of the interesting things with this is what it means for Afghanistan going forward, because the Chinese Communist Party is actually now engaging directly with the Taliban, diplomatic relations, and trying to make ties with them. And as we've mentioned previously on this show, this is one of the things they've talked about doing. So the CCP talked about doing this, again, getting the U.S. involved in at least 4 different wars. We'll see how it plays out. But this is going to have some serious implications that we're going to be going into. Now, as in addition to this, also a judge has reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy with the illegal immigration crisis in the U.S. right now, which has actually become even more significant, I think, given the porous border and if, the terror war starts again, and if Al-Qaeda especially starts again through these Taliban networks, because, you have a lot of people entering the country illegally. We don't know who they are. Some of them may have ties to these terror groups. We do know that Iran has significant influence throughout Latin America. Now, a lot to go into tonight, folks. As always, again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Around the halfway point, we'll get to them. I want to mention again very briefly, though, that, again, we're totally demonetized by YouTube still. We have tried getting our monetization back, denied again. But folks, we do have Epoch TV now. And so if you want to support Crossroads, check out epochtv.com/Crossroads. And also the first episode of our new communism series explaining the history of communism is now out. So it premiered on the 14th. If you haven't watched it yet, check it out. It's the first of several episodes. We're going to have a bunch of episodes on it exclusively on Epoch TV. I'll show you real quick what we're working on with that. In every country communism gains power, authoritarianism and death followed in its wake. Communism promises a world without suffering, and yet, in its execution, does the exact opposite. Following Lenin's death, Stalin's 29-year reign killed an estimated 60 to 66 million people. More famines and purges would occur. The very peasants that communism was supposed to benefit instead starved to death under its rule. The party dictates what is right and wrong. Mao ended up killing between 50 million and 70 million people. As an investigative journalist, I want to understand why. All right, again, folks, that is out now on Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. If you don't have an account with Epoch TV, all you need to get a free trial is your email address. So check it out. If you haven't seen it yet, be sure to go there. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into the first story for the night. And, of course, as always, it's great seeing y'all on here. Yeah, freedom fighters saying Trump equals peace. Yeah, that's right. That's how it was, right? Yeah. Here we are today. Scott Jones said, how did Jose lose today? He told me about the nukes and F-15s. Yeah, LLC is saying scary history. Yeah, actually, the communism series we're doing right now, that first episode is the first of many. And so we're going to be going into a lot of history a lot of people probably have never heard about before. Some really good stuff we're going to go into. Gloria Lenzi said, hello, Josh. Yeah, hello, everyone. Keith Haas, hello, Taiwan. Yeah, folks. Pleasure having you all here as always, and let's get started. So let's talk about what's happening now in Afghanistan. So Epoch Times reports that Biden is now sending 5,000 troops to Afghanistan. A very quick update on this. It is now 6,000 since I made this article earlier, ready for it. They've now added an additional 1,000, so technically 6,000. Let's go into it. It says President Biden announced Saturday that he is deploying more troops to Afghanistan to ensure that U.S. personnel can be evacuated safely. He said, based on the recommendations of our diplomatic, military, and intelligence teams, I have authorized the deployment of approximately 5,000 U.S. troops, updated to 6,000, to make sure we can have an orderly and safe drawdown of U.S. personnel and other allied personnel and an orderly and safe evacuation of Afghans who helped our troops during our mission and those at special risk from Taliban advance, the president said in a statement. Now, briefly on this, there are some pretty sad videos of what's happening right now at the airport in Afghanistan, where people are on the airstrip trying to just pack into these planes as they're taking off. Again, if you've seen some of the historic videos of the fall of Saigon, it looks a lot like that. You have a lot of people just trying to cram into the backs of these airplanes while they take off. Now, I'm going to go more into why this whole troop issue is important, especially as it relates to how the Chinese Communist Party is, making ties with the Taliban now. Let's go over a little more with this, though. Now, further into the story, it states this. It says, besides the newly announced deployment of these new troops, the Biden administration is also committed to addressing future terrorist threats from Afghanistan and helping Afghan President Mohammed Ashraf Ghani Ahmadzadi and other Afghan leaders to pursue a political settlement. In other words, it seems to be the case, helping them basically do a handover of power to the Taliban, which is their settlement, it seems. Unless the U.S. gets involved in that process, that's where it's heading right now. Now, Biden also warned the Taliban that the United States will take a strong military response if U.S. personnel are endangered in Afghanistan. And this is important right now. This is my analysis, take it for what it's worth. But really, this is the most important part of this. Now, what is the Chinese Communist Party doing as we speak? As I mentioned before, the Chinese Communist Party, as we speak, and has been for a little bit now, making diplomatic ties with the Taliban. The Chinese Communist Party is assessing that, this is bound to happen, and they began already making ties diplomatically with the Taliban. Now, previously, what have we discussed in the show? Individuals very close to the Chinese Communist Party have said previously, and as part of the Chinese Communist Party's strategy, that they plan, right? They plan to get the United States and need to get the United States engaged in at least 4 different wars. One of those wars they've mentioned previously was the war in Afghanistan. Now, if the Chinese Communist Party is engaging diplomatically with the Taliban, what might the interest of that be? Well, probably to establish a similar relation with the Taliban that they have with the government in Iran, where, again, really the closest allies the Chinese Communist Party has are North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And Iran is, of course, one of the largest state sponsors of terrorism in the world. Now, that creates this kind of global issue of, financing terror movements all around the world, essentially. The issue you have with the Taliban now is whether the Chinese Communist Party wants to get them re-engaged in a war with the United States and make sure the U.S. stays in Afghanistan. And that's very simple to do at this point. Again, according to this article, the president also warned the Taliban that the United States will take a strong military response if U.S. personnel are endangered in Afghanistan. They're now sending 6,000 troops. The Taliban is already in these major cities. What's it going to take for the Taliban or the Chinese Communist Party to ensure the United States does not leave? Well, all they need to do is start some kind of conflict. All they need to do is fire a few shots, and lo and behold, that's another war added to the CCP's belt that they've been talking about getting the U.S. involved with. Big issue, folks, something to keep an eye out for, because this is what the CCP has said previously. It is where the trajectory is heading. We'll see what happens with it. Now, that said, I've mentioned a few times that we're, again, totally demonetized by YouTube. We do have Epoch TV now, so if you want to support us, check out Epoch TV. We also have our sponsors, and tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, again, folks, you have to make sure you do everything you can to protect your privacy online when emailing and messaging, because you don't really have privacy when it comes to these things. Everything you do online, including sending emails, is often scanned and monitored. Your data is under the magnifying glass of big tech. Now, however, there's a way to have legitimate privacy online by sending emails and messages. It's a new privacy and cybersecurity application called Secure. That's Secur. Again, sponsored for tonight. Secure offers private and secure instant messaging and email, and its servers and data centers are hosted in Switzerland. And that's important because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world, which means it's not subject to the intrusive Cloud Act of the United States, as would other US-based technology systems, unlike Secure. And also, Secure does not mine your data. Using Secure, you can easily communicate with people who have the app and also those who do not have the app. You can also set a timer that will automatically destruct your messages or emails after you send them. Secure also uses technology that lets you communicate without fear that your internet provider will monitor your emails or messages, and also without the need of a VPN. To get Secure, it costs only $5 for the Messenger and $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can take back your freedom and your privacy. Visit secure.com today, and you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And so again, big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. That said, let's go a bit further into what's happening in Afghanistan. Then we'll go into a few other stories on this. Now, first off, again, the Taliban is now entering the presidential palace as the Afghan president has fled the country, is fleeing the country. And Afghan President Ashraf Ghani on Sunday fled the country, that's today, as a Taliban terrorist group surrounded the capital, Kabul, according to a senior official, while the Taliban entered the Afghan presidential palace as well. Photos circulating online show members of the Taliban holding AK-47 style rifles inside the palace. And speaking to Al Jazeera TV during a live stream, a member of the group who was inside the presidential palace said the Taliban is planning to declare Afghanistan the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in the near future. And so, folks, get ready for it. You now have the very likely going to be taking place, the establishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, very briefly on this, Islamism should not be confused with Islam, the religion. Islamism can go back to the Egyptian model of Islam, started by the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which had merged basically the ideas of socialism with the ideas of Sharia law. They had books like In the Footsteps of the Quran and so on, where they reinterpreted Islam and brought in a lot of elements from communism, frankly. Now, their spread of the Egyptian model of Islam, Islamism, made its way to Iran, made its way to different countries. It was part of the Red Prince Rebellion. You might know the Prince Rebellion that took place in Saudi Arabia, where individuals, including a lot of the ones who were closely aligned with Obama, made an attempt to basically have a communist revolution in Saudi Arabia put down by the king. Those individuals are still functioning. And basically what you have is a breakoff from the Muslim Brotherhood, which was Al-Qaeda, is the more armed, violent revolutionary branch, as opposed to Muslim Brotherhood, which was more the politically aligned branch. In other words, this is a communist movement, folks. In fact, I want to do something a little more in depth on this. If they're declaring an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, that means that very likely Afghanistan is going to be in a similar position to Pakistan, or more like Iran going forward, especially if they begin aligning more closely with the Chinese Communist Party. A few big points on this, though, is going to be how the Chinese Communist Party deals with the issue that while they persecute Muslims, the Chinese Communist Party frankly, in the world, is the biggest organization launching persecutions against people of the Muslim faith. Again, the Muslim Uyghurs in East Turkestan, also known as Xinjiang. The Chinese Communist Party is carrying out a genocide against Muslims. How do they deal with that when dealing with the Taliban? The other issue you have is through the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese Communist Party is getting a lot of Islamic terror groups very, very unhappy, including, for example, doing the One Belt, One Road through Balochistan, heading to, I think, the Black Sea. And so you're having a lot of issues like this emerge for the CCP, where they're at risk of getting involved in a terror war themselves. And so we'll have to see how their attempt to get involved in Afghanistan is going to go. And of course, folks, our hearts go out to Afghanistan and the people there. Actually, you may not know, I didn't know, apparently we have a lot of viewers of Crossroads in Afghanistan. I had no idea. There's some great folks there who actually translate the show. I had no idea. And so for all of you out there, wish you the best. And of course, we'll be covering what happens going forward with this. Now, briefly on this as well, Mitch McConnell noted something interesting, which is that the U.S. could have launched airstrikes to stop the Taliban advance into Afghanistan. Now, just like he had when ISIS was taking over, you had these large caravans, essentially, of vehicles traveling. We knew they were terror groups. We knew who was in them. We let them do what they did. We did not launch attacks against them. We let them do what they did. And of course, this allowed them to seize weapons caches, take over cities, take 12-year-old girls in some cases as sex slaves and young brides. And we're in the situation we are now in these countries. Now, we'll see what happens with this. We'll also see whether they choose to expand beyond the borders of Afghanistan. And again, they're also talking about ISIS as another big issue. Now, a few points on this I want to go into, as well as how this relates to the other issues we have of, well, national security here in the United States, as well as other parts of the world, especially in Europe. Because they're not just talking about the Taliban now, which had ties to Al-Qaeda, not technically the same, but ties to Al-Qaeda. And as you also now have this rise of ISIS, which Trump mostly stomped out, but they're now saying is going to be a long-term terror threat. And also the ideological effect that ISIS had on groups like the Taliban and like Al-Qaeda, where you had many leaders of these terrorist groups aligning themselves with ISIS when it established its caliphate through most of this region. Now, going forward, what does this mean? It means that as they've seeded, well, the people of this belief, including, this Islamist terror movement, into countries including different parts of Europe, and very likely including parts of the US through this very open border we have, which is notably not just people from Mexico coming across the US border. You have people from all across the world coming across the US border right now. What does that mean if people here feel disenfranchised, or people in Europe who fled these countries feel disenfranchised, and they start agreeing with the messaging coming out of this new organization, the Taliban, as it becomes the leader of Afghanistan once again? Not only that, but with the established mouthpieces and established technology it did not previously had, including vehicles and weapons it did not previously have because, well, we left them there. What's going to happen, folks? It means that they now have a mouthpiece. They now have capabilities they did not previously have. They have access to multimedia like they didn't have before. And they're now aligned with the Chinese Communist Party in ways that would not have been possible before. What does that mean going forward? It means that they can really become mouthpieces for a global terrorist movement if they so choose. And as you have, again, the very porous border of the United States and who knows who coming across, and notably as well, a lot of people don't know it, but Iran has very, very deep roots in a lot of Latin American countries, to the extent that you have terror groups like Hezbollah having political parties in some of these countries, especially in the tri-border region in different parts in Latin America. So, quick note, tonight's tea is ginseng tea with a bit of honey, and it's very nice. And I want to go into what's happening now with this border crisis. Real quick, too, Omicron Prime mentioning that's Pakistan, talking about some other issues. Actually, this is an important note, too. Remember, historically, after all these wars and borders were drawn up in some of these countries, including Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, one of the issues you have when they drew up these borders is they didn't keep in mind all these tribal regions. And so actually the tribal regions got divided by country. The Pashtun tribe, for example, the Pashtun people, a lot of whom were members of the Taliban early on, were really divided between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And so also this ties to relations with Pakistan, especially as it relates to the CCP's existing very strong ties and use of Pakistan. Meaning the CCP can replicate the systems of control it already has in place in Pakistan to, well, continue leveraging that to use Afghanistan and the Taliban in its own ways. Let's go to what's happening now with the US-Mexico border, though, because this relates to it. It says here, a judge orders Biden administration to resume Remain in Mexico policy. And it says here, a federal judge on Friday said the Biden administration must resume a policy that sees asylum seekers wait in Mexico for their claims to be heard. That was a Trump-era policy. Let's go into it now. Now, the Department of Homeland Security, quote, failed to consider several critical factors before axing the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy. U.S. District Judge Matthew Kaczmarker, a Trump appointee, found. That includes ignoring how the program was beginning to lead to some immigrants with asylum claims that lacked merit voluntarily returning home under the Trump administration. And he wrote this in a 53-page ruling. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on June 1st of this year formally ended this Remain in Mexico policy. meaning that as people try to immigrate illegally into the United States, they want to apply for asylum status, and keep in mind they're advised on how to do so by the human traffickers. Well, it means they have to wait in Mexico while these claims are processed, meaning that if they don't have legitimate reasons for entering the United States illegally or trying to get status here, it's going to be a very long time and they probably won't get in. Now, the program was stopped, of course, when President Biden entered office on January 20th. In a memorandum to top immigration officials, Mayorkas said a review determined the policy does not adequately or sustainably enhance border management in such a way as to justify the program's extensive operational burdens and other shortfalls. And continued, stating, over the course of the program, border encounters increased during certain periods and decreased during others. Moreover, in making my assessment, he said, I share the belief that we can only manage migration in an effective, responsible, and durable manner if we approach the issue comprehensively, looking well beyond our own borders. Now, we'll see what happens with this. Of course, you had the same thing happening a lot when Trump was president, where Obama appointed judges were blocking a lot of his policies. You now have Trump appointed judges blocking a lot of Biden's policies. This is one of the bigger cases of this. We'll see how long this holds on for. Very likely it may have to go to the Supreme Court and they have to rule on whether or not the Remain in Mexico policy is good or bad for the United States. One of the problems you have right now is you have literally 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of people illegally entering the United States every month right now. And these people, as previous data has suggested, come from Texas. About 40% or so of those who have been tested have the virus, and they're being taken and transplanted across the entire United States. Now, these are not just people who are from Latin America, Central America, El Salvador, and these countries. They're coming from Africa, they're coming from China, they're coming from other places. If we have right now the resurgence of a terrorist movement and the resurgence of the Taliban with now new mouthpieces established, and also the assistance of the Chinese Communist Party, which does use already Iran and Pakistan strategically as basically a terror arms for its other operations, we can see how the Chinese Communist Party chooses to use this new system it now has. And also, again, as it relates to the establishments of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, whether the Taliban will continue dealing with these groups and how that will look. Now, on this note, the GOP, the Republican Party, is demanding action as well on the border crisis after alleged leaked audio of DHS secretary is now surfacing. It says here another story. GOP members urge the Biden administration to address the border crisis after leaked audio of Alejandro Mayorkas, who we just discussed in this other article, who ended this Remain in Mexico policy. Secretary of Department of Homeland Security surfaced, which shows him calling the border situation unsustainable. And so this is the same guy who, again, made it so that people don't have to wait in Mexico. Interestingly, basically saying what this Trump-appointed judge said is the justification for ending or bringing back this Trump-era policy of Remain in Mexico. Our DHS secretary allegedly in this leaked audio said the border situation is unsustainable. And he said, it says here, this is a letter, it says, glad Secretary Mayorkas agrees the situation at the border is unsustainable. Now, what is their plan to fix it? That's House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican, writing on Twitter on Friday. And now, in a leaked audio obtained by Fox News, Mayorkas allegedly told Border Patrol agents in Texas that the border crisis is unsustainable. And he said, we're going to lose it if borders are the first line of defense. He said, we can't continue like this if our people in the field can't continue and our system isn't built for it. Now, Mayorkas allegedly said this in an audio release on Thursday, the same day he told reporters that the numbers of illegal aliens encountered are unprecedented. And on this as well, another point, there's a Texas border town that has now reached a deal with the Department of Homeland Security. Another interesting point, because if Mayorkas knows about this and he's stating this, keep in mind why he's saying this as we discuss this. There's a Texas border town that has reached a deal with the DHS over illegal immigration transfers. Let's explain this. It says here, a Texas border town and the federal government have reached a deal that stops the transfer of illegal immigrants to the border community, according to a report. Laredo Mayor Pete Saenz told the Monitor that under the agreement, illegal immigrants transferred to the border town from the Rio Grande Valley will no longer remain in Laredo, but will instead be released to city staff and bussed, get this, they're going to be bussed around to places like Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Now, Saints told the Monitor that under the deal, the city is not required to test the individuals for COVID-19 before transporting them to other Texas locations. And keep in mind, this is as the federal government is encouraging people to, well, businesses and so on, to require these vaccines. If they believe that Americans need to have vaccines to, for example, go to restaurants in LA, they're talking about making people have vaccines to even buy groceries at the store, but they're making it through the DHS so that people coming into the country illegally, hundreds of thousands, don't need to be tested even for the virus before they're transferred to major cities across the United States. Now, they're saying this is according to Saints. He said, the reason why we don't do testing is that once you test, there's an obligation. Now, folks, if they're obligated to do something, is that dealing with the problem or is that deferring the problem, if they believe it's actually a problem? And he said, if they're positive, we're told that you have to quarantine. You hear that, folks? If they're positive, they have to quarantine them. So to get around the quarantine, they're not even bothering testing them. Hundreds of thousands of people, or they're now going to be sending into major cities in Texas. He said, we don't have the infrastructure for that, talking again about the quarantine. He said, I know some people may say you're basically transporting untested people to other cities, and the answer is yes. But what alternative do we have here locally? Saenz told the outlet. And this is, again, the option that they're being left with in Laredo because of the DHS policy of ending the Trump-era policy of remain in Mexico. In other words, DHS has now forced this on Laredo and forced, again, because they don't have the capability to keep these people, forced them to send people who have not even been tested for the virus to major cities throughout Texas. And again, this is as they're telling people across the United States, American citizens, that you have to have COVID vaccines even to go to restaurants, to go to entertainment venues, or to even allegedly to travel. They're working on. A lot of hypocrisy when it comes to these narratives. Let's go into a bit more, though. He added that no ICU beds were available in Laredo hospitals over the past 7 days. And he said, we've had people in overflow, basically waiting for a hospital bed out in the hallways. I think today we had close to 40 just waiting for a room. And he added as well, it will be up to the authorities at the various destination points to carry out testing and provide safety measures. And so now this is deferring the crisis to these major cities throughout Texas. Again, this is him making a deal with the Department of Homeland Security, which ended this policy while stating at the same time in this leaked audio that it's an unprecedented crisis that they cannot even deal with, which again is only happening because they ended this Remain in Mexico policy, which this Trump-appointed judge is now putting a hold on again and making it so people have to remain in Mexico. We'll see where it goes from here, especially as these issues are arising, because it's going to be a court battle from here. And as they look at this data, as they look at the double narratives and taking place, we'll see where it goes. Now, on this note, another interesting point, the Homeland Secretary as well is ignoring a congressional request for information on where illegal immigrants are being sent to. And so as the Department of Homeland Security is busing people across the United States who have not even been tested for the virus, this is the people in charge of Homeland Security, they're, again, not even answering congressional requests for information on this. It says here, illegal immigrants are crossing into the United States from Mexico in record-shattering numbers, but the Department of Homeland Security is ignoring a congressional request for an accounting on where the government relocates them. It says here, according to a quote, on April 15th, 2021, 34 members of the House of Representatives sent a letter requesting important information regarding the destinations within the interior of our nation of the heavy illegal migration over our nation's borders. That's according to Senator Mike Brown and Representative Louis Gohmert, telling DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in an August 5th letter. The letter was also addressed to Department of Health and Human Services HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. The two departments together are responsible for implementing President Joe Biden's open border policy on immigration. which a Trump-appointed judge has just put a hold on. And this is Braun and Gomar telling Mayorkas and Becerra, as of the date of this letter, the response from HHS deferred to DHS, and regrettably OHS has not responded to the Congress's letter. Now, folks, we'll see where it goes from here, because again, there's now a hold on this, and this is no longer just an immigration crisis. This is a virus crisis. If they actually believe this is an issue, because they're not even testing these individuals and they're not quarantining them. This is also a possible national security crisis, as it deals with, again, people possibly being radicalized, or this new rise of the Taliban affecting, again, the global terror movement yet again. See where it goes from here. I'll keep you all updated on it. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions, and I want to go after that into what's happening with some of these vaccine mandates. But first, real quick, again, I mentioned we now have Epoch TV. Crossroads is totally demonetized. We don't plan on leaving YouTube, so don't worry. But we are totally demonetized, and so we do have a lot of exclusive content on Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. The latest of which is the first episode now out of our History of Communism series. So be sure to check that out. It's the Dark Origins of Communism. First episode is now out. We're going to do a weekly release on that and a lot of other stuff in the works. I'll show you a quick trailer of what we're working on, then we'll jump into the questions.
We have a country to save. It sounds cliche, right? I mean, it sounds like a political candidate. We got a country to save, but it really is the truth. We're possibly at the end of the American experiment right now, because for 250 years in America, you had parties that had a different vision for America, but basically believed America was good. But right now, we have half of the political dialect that basically doesn't think America is good. That is a huge problem. That basically wants to erase America's history. That is a huge problem. Whether you're purely a libertarian or you're a more traditional conservative, it's like, that actually doesn't really matter right now. I want to defend the Constitution, rule of law, individual rights, the notion that the founding of America was good. These are all good things.
It's our recent interview with Dave Rubin, now exclusively on Epoch TV. We do have a good length teaser here on YouTube if you want to watch part of it. And again, folks, we also have the first episode of this communism series there, going to be a weekly release. Check out the episode this week. And again, if you want to watch Epoch TV and you don't have an account yet, all you need for a free trial is an email address. So check it out, epochtv.com/Crossroads. All right, that's it. Let's jump into the questions for the night. First up, some crazy Morp. Good seeing you. You said, can the people impeach the president, meaning Biden? If enough Democrat voters wake up and let's say 75% of the nation say we want him out, can he be kicked out like the California governor? Well, that's where your local representatives come in. Yes, the legislative branch of the government can impeach a sitting president, as they tried to do twice to Trump, where the House did vote to impeach Trump, but the Senate, let him off, basically. Now, if the Republicans can take a majority in both the House and the Senate in the upcoming 2022 elections, yes, they could impeach them. And it's through that again, the legislature, that the American people could do something like that if they so chose to do. Again, it's going to come to the 2022 elections, and we'll see where it goes with this. Now, a lot of stuff going on, right? This is from Town Hall. You said, question, have you investigated Friday's DHS terrorism advisory? Yes. So, folks, the Department of Homeland Security, while making a deal with Laredo to make them bus illegal immigrants all across Texas's cities without being tested for the virus and having them not put in quarantine because they're not being tested for the virus, where again, previous estimates put it at 40% infected with the virus. Not only is the DHS bypassing this issue where they claim there's a health crisis with the COVID that they're ignoring when it comes to illegal immigration, not only are they letting people into the country by the hundreds of thousands, while at the same time they're warning about a terror threat taking place, but they're also warning about this, again, domestic terror crisis. Now, If you read into what they're saying, they're warning about a few things as a new terrorism advisory. So the Department of Homeland Security put out a new terror threat advisory. And they're talking both about Islamic terrorism, like you have out of Al-Qaeda, and like you have out of the Taliban, and like you have out of ISIS. They're also talking about domestic terror threats. Now, I didn't fully confirm some of this, although I did read the document and it does say some about this. Summaries of the domestic terror threats have included people who may be a threat, who are at risk of being radicalized, and they define this as people who don't believe in the results of the 2020, who don't believe in the results of the 2020 elections. That could be a sign of someone vulnerable to radicalization, they claim. People who may be hesitant about getting the vaccine, they regard as someone who is vulnerable to radicalization, and they're warning about this. People who don't believe in the legitimacy of the current presidency, that means that you're at least viewed by the Department of Homeland Security as someone vulnerable to radicalization. And they're putting those people in the same camp, basically, as people who may be radicalized under this new terror movement that's now starting. Again, well, resurging, I should say, now that the Taliban is taking over Afghanistan and declaring this new emirate. We'll have to see what happens with this. We knew they were working on this stuff before. They have stated pretty clearly before that this is kind of how they're going to be designating it. And they have been warning about the ideas of what would constitute risks of radicalization. And pretty much, the way they're framing it is white nationalists and so on. And the definition of that is including people who maybe supported Trump, because Trump, they declared, was a white nationalist based on all these other criteria they added on. And big tech and big media have been pushing those agendas. In other words, they manufacture the criteria, they alter the language of establishing the criteria, they change the definition of racism, they change the definition of white supremacy, being that you may support the social and economic systems that create inequality because they want equity, right? They want equal outcome. And so by changing definitions of these words, they can create a category which they can put people under. Once they create this new category, it uses the same language we've had before, but it has totally different meanings. And so the media and big tech organizations can categorize people within this category and then use this as a reporting mechanism to Department of Homeland Security and others, which is how this stuff has been working. At the very least, they can use this for censorship. And again, we'll see where it goes, because interestingly, guess who has their Twitter account still, and guess who lost their Twitter account? Remember how Trump lost his Twitter account, right? Because he was inciting violence. They claimed different estimates on, different takes on that. Take it for what it's worth. He did call for people to go home peacefully on January 6th, and also called for them to, protest peacefully and go home. Twitter deleted those tweets. Guess what still does have an account on Twitter, though? The Taliban spokesperson. As again, they're launching a campaign of violence and, child sex slavery across Afghanistan, which they don't seem to have an issue with. Now, another question here is from Shannon Haney. He said, Josh, are you familiar with the Delphi technique for forcing consensus in social engineering? Do you think social engineering plays a significant role in shaping history? Yes, actually, I'm familiar with the Delphi technique. I can't list it off the top of my head, but basically, there's been some interesting comparisons between the Delphi technique of forcing consensus and what's happening now with the virus. This includes things such as forcing people to adhere to menial and seemingly meaningless tasks, where again, you're told to wear face masks, you're told to quarantine, you're told to social distance even at home, you're told to wear a face mask around your kids at home, things like this. Things that are micromanaging your life to a very, very minute level. Policies that instill fear in people, policies that threaten people, and so on. I mean, there's a lot of different categories to the Delphi technique. But if you go category by category, you can see it being replicated basically with what's happening now with the lockdowns and quarantine and the way they're using this for political agendas. It's worth looking into, actually, if you haven't seen it, the Delphi technique, DELPHI technique. And yes, I am familiar with it, and it does seem to be very close to what's happening now. At the very least, intentionally or not, it's using the same basic methods right now. And you asked the second part of this question, do you think social engineering plays a significant role in shaping history? Without a doubt. Now, a few notes on this. If you were to get into Chinese Communist Party military language, they call this psychological warfare. The Chinese Communist Party actually has a program for this. They call it the three warfares. The three warfare adopted into the military code publicly. You can look it up. Three warfares. That is psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. Psychological warfare is not actually lying to you, technically. It's altering the way you interpret information. It's the war of narratives. It is basically you and I can look at the same set of information and we can come to wildly different conclusions on it. Because the worldview, they also call it worldview warfare, the worldview you've been instilled with is based on an entire different interpretation of history, an entire different interpretation based on the narratives of incidents that have taken place in the world, an entirely different view of the narratives of history and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy and so on, that will inform how you interpret reality itself. Now, the Soviets called this ideological subversion. Great videos on this. Check out Yuri Bezmenov. You can also check out a book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays, which I have a copy of at the office. I don't have it here, which goes into this as well. Now, when it comes to these programs of social engineering, yes, it's being used very heavily. Edward Bernays' book, Propaganda, was the model used in the United States that established a lot of modern media advertising. Most media organizations and marketing organizations are well familiar with it. And interestingly, it became a major tool as well for political campaigns. And so politics also heavily uses it. You'll find a lot of politicians even openly admitting the use of some of these techniques. Very worth looking into if you haven't read the book. It's not that thick. Again, that's Edward Bernays' Propaganda. Very well worth reading. So a lot of stuff we can go into on that. I could do a whole episode just on this. There's so much to go into with it. All right, I'll talk a little more. Okay, so if you get into the real ideas of psychological warfare, they talk about a person's mythos. Your mythos is basically your system of values and your way of interpreting reality. Your mythos is informed by the stories you were raised with, the poems or stories and fairy tales or whatever it is as a kid, the religion you were raised with, the culture you were raised with, the movies and ideas presented to the movies you were raised with, the music you were raised with, even art. All of this establishes your mythos, your perception of right and wrong, your perception of history, all the things that inform who you are as a person. That's your mythos. Now, they also talk about your cycle of meaning, the process through which you attach meaning to things. If you, just as an example, the idea of this cycle of meaning concept is that everything you see, basically you interpret as something. Everything is a symbol of a deeper perception, right? And so, for example, if you were to show a person a cross, like a crucifix, a Christian symbol, a Christian would interpret that as a symbol of salvation. They would interpret it as a symbol of sacrifice, right? If someone totally uninformed about the story of Christ or Christianity would interpret it in no way. They would have no way to interpret it. They'd just see two pieces of wood crossed over each other. It would have no deeper meaning. Now, how do you subvert that? You retell stories. You tell people that rather than this is a symbol of salvation, this is a symbol of persecution, this is a symbol of inequality, this is a symbol of racism, these things. And you establish news stories, right, through this cycle of meaning, the subversion of this cycle of meaning, in order to instill people with a new version of history, a new version of reality, and a new way of interpreting right and wrong. Critical race theory is a great example of this. Critical race theory is a reinterpretation of the mythos that establishes the culture of the United States. And every communist movement has done this. You have the same thing done during the Cultural Revolution in China. You have the same thing done under the Soviets. You have the same thing done by Marx and his entire reinterpretation of human history. All of this is the subversion of the mythos, the things that establish your system of values and your perception of reality in order to instill this new way of viewing things, right? And again, yes, this is heavily used. Edward Bernays' propaganda informing what's happening in the United States, Chinese Communist Party as we speak, using its system of the three warfares concept, which you can read about online. This isn't conspiracy in any way. They talk about this very openly. Soviet programs of ideological subversion going back to Pavlov's dog and Lenin and the way he wanted to use that to social engineer societies, going to even things like what they call agitation propaganda, going to things like what Mao Zedong talked about of establishing power words, using language and redefining language, the same things that George Orwell writes about in 1984, in terms of how language can be manipulated to create new ways, a new reality, essentially. All these things are playing out. And yes, I'd say many people these days interpret a very different form of history than, well, what most of us were raised with, frankly. Let's go over one more question, and then let's go into some more stories. Let's see here. This is from Berger Colwilm. You said, Josh, what will you do when Larry Elder will become governor of California? You lose him for the show? Yeah, it's a sacrifice. Those of you who don't know, Larry Elder, radio talk show host, long been in the talk show industry for a long time. He also does a show for Epoch Times, the Larry Elder Show, which you can find on Epoch TV and on YouTube. Larry Elder has a show with us. He's also running for governor in California for the recall of Governor Gavin Newsom. And we'll see very soon, because the election's coming up, whether Larry Elder becomes the new governor of California or not. If he does win, well, it means that probably he's not going to do the show for us, at least until he's out of office. We'll see about afterwards, whether he still wants to do it. But if he doesn't win, he'll keep doing the show. It is a sacrifice on our part because we love Larry and we think he does great work on his show. But of course, I think he has his own path, and we'll see what that means for California. All right, folks. Let's jump into some. Actually, this is another interesting one. This is from Sparks and Clark. He said, question, Josh, do you think if Biden died that the media would do the deep fake videos to keep him appearing alive? Just ask after I saw Biden's hand go through a press microphone. I did see that very weird video of, it looked very strange, of Biden doing a press conference and he waves his arm and it looks like his arm like clips through a microphone. Like it looked like a green screen and his hand just goes through it. A lot of people tried saying that, well, the mics are just positioned weird and it was just an optical illusion, and so maybe it was fine. If you watch the video, it's very weird looking still. Even if you slow it down, it's very weird looking, which did raise some questions over Biden's health and whether they were keeping him somewhere. No one knows why he keeps going back to his home in Delaware. No one knows what he's doing. And so there are some concerns about Biden's health right now. Personally, I think that a lot of the people who supported Obama and who wanted Obama in office and backed his campaign early on, they were actually backing Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was their pick, but she was so unpopular during the Democrat primaries that they couldn't get her in even for the Democrats, let alone do a full presidential campaign with her. And so I think a lot of the people running the show behind the scenes would want Kamala Harris in, not Biden anyways, but we'll have to see. In terms of that whole deep fake technology, yeah, that whole thing is weird. Anyone remember the whole story on this when deep fake technology came out? It was basically when there were all these internet rumors going around that they were incriminating videos of U.S. officials that were going to be released online. And while there were all these rumors spreading of the existence of incriminating videos, suddenly I believe it was one of the U.S. intelligence departments, just suddenly makes public this technology that they had already to create videos where you can superimpose people's faces onto videos and create very realistic fake-looking videos. Again, deep fake technology. Most people use it for very unethical type videos these days. But the way that was released was very bizarre. And what this means as well is that it's very hard to trust the validity of videos online now, including, frankly, for a lot of video news, because it can be faked. That said, the media industry as it is already fairly deceptive with this. A lot of them do green screen things. They've been it's known behind the scenes, put it that way. And so there's a lot of very weird ways of framing things in ways that are not accurate that a lot of organizations use. I'd say the big corporate media uses liberally. Let's put it that way. And so I would say that, yeah, there is a bit of a puppet show going on with a lot of things. In terms of Biden's health and so on, frankly, I think the people who would do something like that would want Kamala Harris in anyway. So I don't see them doing that, but it's just my analysis. Take it for what it's worth. All right, folks, let's go into some more stories for the night. And then, I want to go over what's happening with the virus right now. Because, of course, they're talking about these vaccine mandates across the U.S. First of all, this is according to a top Democrat. They're now saying who could be that dumb, and they're wanting now a federal crackdown on people who are using fake vaccine cards. And we'll see where this goes. One more note on this as well. Even the White House is weighing in on it. The White House is declaring now it's a crime to fake COVID-19 vaccine cards, while at the same time claiming they don't have a vaccination database. And so if the federal government does not run a vaccination database, how can they validate whether people have been vaccinated if they don't have this database? In other words, through which process would they validate it, and how would they know whether people are faking it if they did not have it, or at the very least have access to it? And that's the big question I was asking before. Remember when they said we don't have, earlier on, remember when the White House was saying the federal government does not have a vaccine database and they would not operate one, right? I noted that was an important play on words because it did not say they would not access one. In other words, if it came to federal enforcement of a vaccine mandate policy, they would need to access a database to prove whether a crime was committed if you were to use a fake vaccine passport. They would need to have access to it for the process of litigation and so on, right? They would need to access it. And they're now saying that it's a crime to do so, and you have Democrats calling for a federal crackdown. How could they have a federal level crackdown if they could not access a database to validate or verify whether or not people have been vaccinated when it comes to allegations of people using fake cards? Important question to ask. On this, let's go into it a bit. It says federal officials this week warned that it is a crime to falsify COVID-19 vaccination cards amid new restrictions handed down by several major cities. It said we are aware of some cases of fraud of counterfeit COVID-19 cards being advertised on social media sites and e-commerce platforms, while the practice is not widespread. It's the White House COVID-19 coordinator, Jeff Zients, saying during a COVID-19 White House virtual press briefing. Zients added that it's a crime and that the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Health and Human Services is investigating these crimes, meaning, folks, that the federal government right now is enforcing the vaccine passport policies by, again, defending these policies in cities that have passed them, meaning that while the federal government is not actually creating these policies, they are enforcing these policies created locally. Again, it's businesses, individual businesses, and sometimes cities creating these policies. And it means that if you violate these policies for a business or for a city or whatever organization it is, that the federal government now is getting involved in the process of prosecuting crimes with that, meaning, again, enforcement. They said previously the FBI and other federal agencies said that anyone who is buying or selling vaccine cards could face penalties. On Thursday, meaning you could just face maybe a financial penalty. On Thursday, Zients said that the federal government is not planning to create a centralized database that holds individuals' vaccination records, suggesting again that they're going to access it somehow, and suggesting again that they're going to not run it themselves, but very likely access an external database maintained by somebody for the process of prosecution. That said, interesting note here, there's a sharp rise in job postings stipulating vaccine requirements. And this means, of course, that if there's a sharp rise suddenly, that maybe people who had jobs have been fired from their jobs because more people are looking to hire now. I won't go too deep into this one, but one point I want to mention on it, it says that vaccination requirements are emerging in sectors that in the past didn't typically require employees to be inoculated, such as software development and marketing. Meaning, We were talking about nurses getting vaccinated and healthcare workers getting vaccinated and federal government employees getting vaccinated and people who engage a lot with, let's say, clients and so on, like people running restaurants getting vaccinated and having these vaccine requirements for these industries. Now they're saying it's even industries like software development, marketing, in other words, office jobs requiring vaccination as well, meaning these vaccine policies are spreading to other parts of the US. And as this happens as well, the hiring process is looking for people who are vaccinated. And what does that mean? Very likely more unemployed people who are not vaccinated because, well, it's going to be hard to find a job that requires vaccines if you don't want to get vaccinated, right? And this is important on this note too. Let's go into this. Labor Department is allotting $240 million to fight what they call a terrifying level of unemployment insurance fraud. Meaning, folks, if you can't get a job because you don't want to get vaccinated and the jobs you want to apply for are overwhelmingly requiring vaccinations, what is your option? Your option is unemployment. And as more people are very likely going to have to register for unemployment because they don't choose to get vaccinated out of their beliefs or their standards, or just their health choices, it means that now you have additional regulation on the unemployment process as well. And this is very important because, as you might remember in a recent episode, we talked about this new policy they're implementing across different states in the U.S. that validates whether you've had, whether your unemployment system is, or your unemployment status is legitimate, that uses a very, very intrusive form of technology, including biometric data like your facial scan, including geolocation data, including all kinds of stuff. Meaning that if you choose to not get vaccinated and you're on unemployment status, you're in some states, many states, going to be under this new policy that is extremely intrusive, that monitors you in very, very intrusive ways. That is, again, now it seems to be the case, being enforced to an extent through this new Labor Department policy and using $240 million specifically to fight what they call unemployment insurance fraud, meaning if they're going to look for fraud, it's very likely going to be new systems in place like the one we've discussed previously that will ensure fraud's not taking place. Let's go into it. It says the Labor Department is giving $240 million to states for measures like beefing up cybersecurity defense. Hear that, folks? The measures they're talking about are cybersecurity defense and identity verification. Does that sound familiar, given the recent episode where we talked about how already states are implementing, I think over 20 states, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe over 20 states already have implemented this new policy that uses, again, your biometric data and all kinds of other intrusive monitoring programs for this. And now this Labor Department program is specifically giving $240 million to states for measures like that they say are for beefing up cybersecurity defense and identity verification. And the one we talked about before was an identity verification program. This is in a bid to fight what they call an explosion of unemployment insurance fraud. The move announced on August 12th in a press release as part of a broader trust to modernize the unemployment insurance system. Hear that, folks? Modernize the system. What does that mean? High tech, probably. If you're talking about modernization. And what does high tech mean? Probably things like we've been talking about. Biometric data monitoring, databases on folks, programs that monitor your geolocation and so on, which these programs do use. And again, folks, if you choose to not get vaccinated and you have to register for unemployment, this is you. Let's go into a bit more. It says here, they're planning to modernize the unemployment insurance system, the shortcomings of which have been exposed amid a surge of fraudulent activity after federal lawmakers expanded jobless compensation programs last year in response to the virus outbreak. It continues further in the story stating, the department is making $140 million in grants to states. In other words, if you're a state that wants to put this new system in place, you get a grant. Right, $140 million for grants to states for a range of fraud prevention measures, including implementation of cybersecurity defense strategies, expansion of data analytics systems, right, folks, and overpayment recovery methods, as well as enhancement of identification verification measures. Does that sound familiar? Such as this biometric data monitoring system, again, that is for identification verification, as they would claim, according to a Department of Labor memo. Now, the money will come from the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. Remember that one where you were supposed to get money from the federal government and they gave it to a lot of stuff that had nothing to do with the virus? It's back to haunt you, folks. $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, creating this new social monitoring system, or implementing more deeply the social monitoring system for people who choose to be unemployed because maybe they don't believe in certain policies. It also allocated $2 billion to the Department of Labor for a range of measures, including to prevent and detect fraud. Now, briefly on this, because it's getting late, the FDA has approved booster COVID-19 shots for vulnerable, immunocompromised people. It's important to note that what the FDA has approved is not the first round of the vaccine, but the booster shot. In other words, if you've already had the vaccine, they need to give you every 6 months a booster shot, maybe indefinitely, depending on which one. There's mixed narratives on how long you need to take it for. I believe the Moderna CEO is suggesting it may be indefinite. Different U.S. officials are saying you may not need it at all. But they've now approved, the FDA has approved this booster shot. The FDA approval of the official vaccine itself is still pending, but the booster shot is now approved for people who they say are vulnerable or immunocompromised. The CDC is also recommending a third COVID-19 dose for people who are immunocompromised, meaning the CDC is recommending that booster shot that the FDA just approved. Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna are poised to make billions of dollars on this booster shot, which may again be indefinite for people who've been vaccinated. And the Lambda COVID-19 variant is now showing vaccine resistance. A new study suggests, and that Lambda variant is coming right up from Latin America, which hundreds of thousands of people are crossing the United States from right now as we speak. That said, folks, it's getting late, and so we'll end it here tonight. Again, there's so many stories we could go on for a very, very long time, but let's call it a night here. Again, I'll be keeping you updated on all the major stories. Every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, I do these live Q&As, so be sure to tune in next time. And folks, also, if you want to support Crossroads, check out Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. We have our new documentary series up investigating the origins of communism. We have this America Rewritten documentary. We have other stuff in the works I'm really wanting to tell you about, but I can't just yet. And a lot of other shows there as well. If you don't have an account with Epoch TV, check it out anyways. All you need for a free trial is an email address. And so go there, check it out, folks. Again, epochtv.com/Crossroads. And that said, as always, please take care of yourselves. It's always great. Stay informed and stay free. Thank you.